All right. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to our DIY How to Install Tile Flooring workshop. Man, am I excited that you're here. My name is Zealand Sproul.
I'm Joe Cobb.
And we are here to help you do this amazing DIY project. Before we get too deep, we have a lot to cover today. First, we're going to talk to you all about the tools necessary. That way you can gather them up, you can buy them, you can rent them, and just get prepped for this project. Then we're going to prep your surface. You got a lot to go on before anything starts, so let's get that prepped, and then we'll work on the tile layout. Then we'll work on setting the grout, and then we'll work on wrapping it up. Well, let's start with tools like we promised. So the tools that you need, they're not relatively expensive, right? Most of these are just small handheld tools, but there are specific ones that you need. So let's start off with a trowel, okay? This is what's called a trowel. Now, both of these are trowels. What you're going to notice right there, Leland, what do you see is a little bit different there?
That one's a whole lot smaller.
It is, absolutely. These are smaller notches. These are like 3/16 of an inch. These notches right here, you can see that's a quarter of an inch. Typically, the larger notches are what you're going to use for doing something on the floor. Or if you're using bigger tile like today, this is actually what we're using today for the floor. It's a 12 by 12 tile. I do recommend using a little bit bigger tile when you're starting out. Yes, you want to make sure that you have the right trowel. Now, you can find kits, they'll offer these. And the great thing is, once you buy any type of towel online, it'll actually recommend the right trowel for you. So, trowel isn't necessarily first thing you need.
That is a really good point because sometimes I need direction.
Now, once you've got the trowel, you got to have the grout float. This is what's going to help you once all that tile set to fill in those spaces. And that grout, well, it's just there to be pretty, right? So you need it to work. Now, the grout float is a little bit different than that trowel. You'll see it's a lot thicker. It's also hard rubber. It's going to make it a little easier to use and glide across that tile. It also got some sharp edges and some rounded corners. So this is really designed to just fit best in your hand, how you're going to use it, and best get the grout in between all those spaces once you lay that tile.
Absolutely. And don't worry, folks, we're going to show you how to use all these things along the way. Now, Leland just talked about those spaces in between tile. Well, those are called grout lines. Now, in order to have proper grout lines, you need spacers. People ask us all the time, you actually need to use spacers. You really do. And spacers come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. What about a penny? You can use a penny, but here's the thing about using anything that's not actually designed for a spacer. It's going to be really hard to pull out of that mortar once it's sealed. The last thing you want is a bunch of stuck pennies in your floor. So there's a couple different spacers. First off, you have spacers like these. These are actually called lead-in spacers. Now, you can actually lay these flat down just like this, or you can actually have them stuck in like this. I'll show you how to use these as well. So these are lead-in spacers. Now, spacers determine your grout line. What do you want your grout line to be? Well, that really depends on your aesthetic view of where you want it. I like thicker grout lines for larger tiles. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have thicker grout lines. Other systems you can use, these are really popular right now. These are the leveling system. Now, the way these work is you put these in between the tiles, and then these tops just screw on like that. They help keep the tile level. And then once the mortar is cured, you just snap off. These stay underneath the tile. So it's kind of like a lead-in spacer as well. But what I want you to see is if you use a spacer like this, well, look how thin that grout line would be. It's just a fraction of what I'm using over here. Again, nothing wrong with that, but you want to make sure that you have the same grout line. Other leveling systems, very similar to that, same type of process. You put this in between the two tiles, slide this system in, it levels your tiles, and then that just snaps off again. Again, though, you can see the difference is the thinness of the grout line. So some tiles are recommended to have a little bit thicker grout lines than others, but it really just depends on what you want. But yes, you do need spacers. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, Leland, this is a messy, messy job. So plenty of sponges. You can't have too many sponges for a job like this. You definitely need sponges. Leland's got his sponges too. Also, buckets. And what's in those buckets? Water. You need water because you need a lot of cleanup with this. And I got to tell you, it's good just to have that standing by because mortar, grout, things like that, even when it gets on the tiles, it will dry relatively quickly. Not where you have to move at, lightning pace to clean it off, but you want to constantly be wiping and cleaning to get any of that film or road pieces of grout from mortar off. Again, you'll see a lot of this in the demo.
Yeah, I messed this up a lot. Sponges are really helpful. Now that tile is beautiful, but folks, sometimes you gotta cut it. You gotta shape it. You gotta make it fit the area it's supposed to fit in.
Sure.
One of the tools you can use are nippers. Nippers are really good for those small cuts, those small shapes. They're kind of practicing and hiding some of the mess ups that you might do. A lot of different nippers out there. First, you've got these that are for glass, right? Look at these two scoring wheels. They actually come together and hard to say it, they break the glass,
They really do, yeah.
but it's clean. It looks good and it looks like you cut it on purpose. Then you've got things like with what we're going with later, and that is stone. You need a compound nipper, something that's really got a lot more power than just your grip strength. And the hinges and the springs really help with that. You're going to notice that when you close those, they don't come all the way together because, again, with a nipper, you're breaking the tile. It's pretty hard to cut that circular line. Then, of course, you've got a handheld version of our tabletop cutter, which I'll get in just a second. You've got a small scoring wheel and a rubber pad. And once you've scratched the surface of your tile, almost always this is going to be ceramic or porcelain. You'll squeeze this together, you put a little pressure, and they'll snap apart. Again, these take a lot of practice to use. I love using these for some ball cuts, going around some windowsills, going around some of that baseboard. This really helps you out in the long run. Now, of course, there are other cutters, right? You've got the
Yeah, you got the tabletop slider right here. So this is a tabletop slider that we're going to use. We'll show you how to operate that in just a few moments. And then we actually have my personal favorite, which is the wet towel saw. I'll show you how to use that as well. I do recommend the wet towel saw, especially when you're using very heavy stone like this. Now, you don't necessarily have to buy a wet towel saw. You can actually rent these as well. But before you do any cutting, Leland, very, very important, we always recommend that you have the proper safety goggles and gloves to make sure that you are properly secure. And Leland, you know what? You make safety look cool. Very cool, man. I like it. Absolutely. So yeah, make sure that you have those as well. Again, we're going to demonstrate how to use these for you in just a few moments. Now, let's get started. The first thing we have to do is surface prep.
Once you've prepared your wood subfloor, you will need to install cement-based backer board following the manufacturer's installation instructions. It provides a solid surface under the tile that prevents flexing that could lead to cracking. Be aware that when you're working on any subfloor or tile project, you may find the terms thinset and mortar used interchangeably. Don't get confused because both refer to the same material. Use a polymer modified thinset to attach the backer board to the subfloor and to fill in any potential gaps that might exist between the backer board and the subfloor. The polymer modified thinset provides additional strength and eliminates the possibility of any movement between the backer board and the subfloor. Follow the directions on the packaging to properly mix the thinset mortar and wear safety glasses. Use a large bucket and a drill with the mixing paddle. Be sure to clean the mixing paddle promptly so the mortar does not harden on it. Some mortars may require a latex polymer admixture, which will improve the performance of the mortar and increase bond strength. Some installation material manufacturers require the latex admix to be used at full strength as a replacement to water. Do not dilute if this is the case. Take care not to mix too large a batch of thinset. It has a limited working life, and if you mix too much, it will start to harden before you've had a chance to use all of it. If this happens, you will need to discard it and mix more. With a trowel, scoop out and spread enough mortar on the wood subfloor to cover an area slightly larger than your first piece of backer board. Comb the mortar with the notched edge of a trowel at a 45-degree angle to the floor, taking care to make sure the trowel lines go in the same direction. Work quickly while the mortar is wet. Place the first sheet of backer board on the mortar. Walk gently on the panels as you begin to screw the backer board into the subfloor using special backer board screws. Use 1 5/8 inch screws for 1/2 inch backer board and use 1 1/4 inch screws for 1/4 inch backer board. Drive screws every 8 inches over the entire surface, 1/2 inch from the edges and 2 inches from the corners. Some backer board manufacturers have identified the locations on the backer boards of where the screws need to be placed. Expect to use 54 to 60 screws per sheet of backer board. Every screw head should be flush with the panel. Use a drill with a clutch to speed up driving the backer board screws. Continue this process to lay the rest of your backerboard panels, remembering to leave a 1/4 inch gap at the walls. Use 16D common nails to create a 1/8 inch gap between the sheets. Arrange the sheets so that the ends are staggered and don't align with each other. In other words, be sure that no 4 corners of the backerboard touch. Also, if your subfloor runs east to west, lay your backerboards in the opposite direction, north to south. You also don't want the edges of the backerboard aligning with the seams in the wood subfloor. Leave a 1/4 inch gap between the edges of the backerboard and the walls to allow for subfloor expansion and contraction. Backerboard panels are traditionally 3 feet by 5 feet, but can be up to 4 feet by 8 feet in size. If you find that you need to cut the backerboard, measure and mark where you need the cut and score along the line with a carbide backerboard cutter and a straight edge. Depending upon the manufacturer of the backerboard, you may need to score both sides. Press down with your hand and knee on the edge of one side of the line and lift the opposite edge to snap the panel. After all backerboard sheets are in position, remove the 16D common nails. Then, reinforce the joints with self-adhesive alkali-resistant glass fiber tape specially made for backerboard. Cover the tape with thin-set mortar and level it with a straight edge. If you use non-adhesive tape, you'll want to first fill the gaps with mortar before setting the tape in the mortar. Then, cover the tape with another layer of thin-set and level. Allow the thin-set to dry before proceeding, usually a day. Check the package for specific drying times.
Let's talk about concrete floors, for example. Maybe you have a basement, you want to finish it. Maybe you're putting in a bathroom, you want to put down some tile floor there. Hey, first and foremost, you got to prepare that concrete.
A self-leveling compound can be poured over the entire floor if the surface has a number of high and low spots. If you have a few uneven spots, you can treat just those areas. Mix the leveler in a bucket according to the manufacturer's instructions. Wear rubber gloves and safety glasses. If you've made any adjustments to your floor, you must allow them to completely dry days before installing the new floor. Follow manufacturer's instructions, but this usually takes several days. If there are cracks larger than 1/8 of an inch in your concrete subfloor, those should be patched and filled with a cement patching compound. Concrete subfloors move, shift, and crack over time. To prevent that movement from creating cracks in your grout and tile, once your concrete subfloor is clean, flat, and free of cracks larger than 1/8 of an inch, you will need to install a crack prevention membrane. You can either roll on a liquid latex membrane or put down a peel and stick crack prevention mat over the entire concrete subfloor. Carefully follow the manufacturer's directions for application of these products. To start planning the layout of your tile, you must first find the center point of the room. To do this, measure the 4 walls in the room and find the midpoints. Then, snap 2 chalk lines, one from the midpoints of 2 opposite walls and another from the midpoints of the 2 other walls. Where they intersect will be the room's center point. Check that the chalk lines are square by marking points 3 feet on one chalk line and 4 feet on a perpendicular chalk line starting at the intersection. Measure the diagonal space between each of these 2 points. If the distance between the two is exactly 5 feet, the lines are square. If the lines aren't square, the tiles will not be centered and the room might not look balanced. If the room is not square, which is very common, you will need to make adjustments to the position of one line and then square the other line using the 3-4-5 procedure. Next, you'll want to lay a single half row of tiles in both directions without mortar, starting at the center point and working outward. You do this in order to ensure the finished project will be centered. Insert spacers between the tiles. Stop when there is not enough room for a full tile. If the space at the end of either row is smaller than 1/3 of a tile, you'll want to adjust the chalk lines so half tiles appear on both sides of the room. Since you started in the center, 1/3 of a tile on one end means that you'd have 2/3 of a tile on the other end of the room and it will look off center. After making any adjustments, be sure to re-snap your chalk lines. Before laying your tile, you should pull tiles from different boxes and mix them. Don't just use tile in order from one box at a time. Sometimes slight tonal differences can occur between different boxes of tile. By mixing the tiles as you go, you'll spread and mix these differences throughout your floor and they won't be noticeable. Many floor tiles today have multiple graphics in each box. These are usually tiles that are designed to emulate natural stone and a random look when installed. Also, be aware that some tiles have directional arrows on the back. You must keep these arrows pointing in the same direction as you lay out the tiles to ensure pattern alignment. When installing tile, be sure to wear safety glasses and rubber gloves when mixing and applying mortar. Also, consider wearing knee pads to evenly distribute your body weight and save your knees. You'll be glad you did. Read the mixing instructions on the back of the package to ensure proper mixing of the mortar mix. One more thing, when tiling an area that will butt up against a different kind of flooring like carpet or hardwood, a threshold transition is needed. Check with one of our store associates prior to your project to find out which type is right for your project and when it should be installed. Some go in before tiling begins, and some are installed at the end of your project.
Now it's time to actually start getting that tile on the floor. And this is where the mortar and the thin set comes in. Mortar and thin set are kind of an interchangeable term. And it's really important that we think about the thin set word because it's actually supposed to be kind of thin. Remember the trowels that we were holding up? In between, you're going to be scraping this along the floor. But because we have those gaps, mortar is going to be left behind. It's actually going to compress when you put those tiles down, spreading across the tile. There's actually a couple different types of thin set and mortar. First, it's just that big bag of powder that you go buy at the store. This is thin set and mortar that you are going to mix yourself with water. We recommend putting it in one of those 5-gallon paint buckets. It's the absolute easiest thing and the easiest way to mix. We're going to show you how to do that in just a second. But if you don't feel like mixing yourself, you can get pre-mixed thin set. I love this for smaller projects, usually for backsplashes or something that you don't necessarily want to last more than, let's say 10 years. The mortar and the thin set that you mix yourself, once that cures, as long as you let it cure correctly, it's going to last a long, long time, 10, 15, 20, even more years. Thin set is typically referred to, that's pre-mixed, as a mastic or an adhesive, and that is going to last a little bit longer but won't necessarily have any less of a hard hold during the time that it lasts. Now, one last note about thin set. Some special thin sets and mortars exist. You might be doing glass tile. You might be doing large format porcelain or just large format tile in general. A good rule of thumb, if a special mortar or thin set exists, use it. There is a reason. Either it's going to come through the stone the right or the wrong way, come through the glass or porcelain the right or the wrong way, and end up making a much better project. We always say one thing: you can do this right, or you can do it again. And the right thin set makes sure that you don't have to do it again. Now, as promised, we're going to show you how to mix this mortar before you have to actually start laying tile. So check it out.
Thin set mortar is the cement or bonding agent used to attach the tile to the backer board or concrete subfloor. Use a large bucket and drill with a mixing paddle. Be sure to clean the mixing paddle promptly so the mortar does not harden on it. Some mortars are labeled as non-modified and require a latex polymer admixture, which will improve the performance of the mortar and increase bond strength. But most mortars come already modified. Porcelain floor tile must always be installed using a polymer modified thin set to achieve the appropriate bond between the tile and the substrate receiving the tile. This also applies to exterior installations. Also, mortars must be allowed to stand for 5 to 10 minutes after mixing. They cannot be used immediately. Slake time, as this is referred to, allows the chemicals in the mortar to fully activate. Make sure you follow the instructions on your mortar mix package. For wood subfloors where a backer board was installed, be sure to moisten the backer board by misting it with a spray bottle filled with water before spreading the thin set. Spray the backer board as you work. If you don't do this, the backer board will soak up water from the mortar, causing it to dry too rapidly. This will impact how well your tiles adhere to the subfloor. Take care not to mix too large a batch of thin set. It has a limited working life, and if you've mixed too much, it will start to harden before you've had a chance to use all of it. If this happens, you'll need to discard it and mix more. Do not add water after the thinset begins to harden because this weakens the cement and severely affects the bonding between the tile and the backer board. Mix up a bucket of thinset mortar appropriate for the type of tile you're installing. There are differences, so check with the store associate to ensure you make the right choice. Plan your installation so that you have an exit without stepping on any of the tiles before the thinset hardens, which takes approximately 24 hours. In other words, don't tile yourself into a corner. Trowels have both a smooth edge and a notched edge. The notches are called teeth. The type and size of the tile you're installing will determine the depth and the width of the teeth your trowel should have. Check installation materials packaging for guidance. The size of the notch determines how much thinset is left on the floor receiving the tile. Typically, the larger the tile, the larger the notch needed. This helps when leveling larger tiles and prevents lippage or a trip hazard between tiles. Use your trowel to scoop out a generous amount of mortar from your mix bucket. Starting in one quadrant at the center point of the room where your chalk lines intersect, begin spreading the thinset with the flat side of the trowel and press it into the backer board at roughly a 45-degree angle. This will ensure the mortar fully adheres to the backer board. To begin, you should do one test tile to ensure the consistency of the mortar is appropriate. Put the first test tile onto the thinset bed. Lay the tile flat and slightly twist it and gently press it down evenly in the centers and corners. Pull the tile up and check the back of the tile. It should be completely covered with thinset. If you have areas on the tile not covered with mortar, it means you either did not mix the mortar properly, did not spread the mortar evenly, or waited too long to set your first tile and the mortar started to dry. It also might be because you didn't evenly and firmly press the tile into the mortar. Correct as necessary and proceed. Once you've confirmed you have the right consistency in the mortar, relay your first tile, ensuring it's still lining up with the chalk lines at the center and that it is fully pressed back into the mortar. Next, place 2 spacers along the side where you will add a tile. Use 2 spacers, one on each end. Spacers are used to easily and quickly ensure equal spacing between tiles. Always position your spacers so they stick up and out. A common mistake is to lay them on their side in the corners where 4 tiles meet. If you do this, they become embedded in the mortar and can be very hard to remove. Also, grouting over those spacers will compromise the integrity of the grout by creating a thin spot in the cement. Next, set your second tile by aligning the edges and corners, hinging it down and slightly twisting it back and forth. Comb the thinset using the notched side of your trowel, holding the trowel at a 45-degree angle to the floor and lightly pressing the trowel teeth to the floor. Make sure you comb the thinset in one direction. Avoid circular or swirling patterns. Also, don't push so hard that you remove the thinset entirely from the floor. The combed channels will flatten out and compress when the tile is placed, ensuring the proper amount of mortar is present beneath the tile. To avoid having excess mortar squirt out from under the tiles into the spaces between, use a small, thin trowel to remove a small amount around the edges of your tiles as you go. Do not allow the thinset to skim over or start drying as you go. If it does, remove it and apply new thinset. As you lay your tile, always check them for dirt or dust. Wipe them clean if needed. The dust can affect how effectively they adhere to the mortar. If you're new to tiling, you may only want to apply enough mortar for 1 or 2 tiles at a time. When choosing where to place the next tiles, know that it really doesn't matter as long as you keep 2 things in mind. Follow your chalk lines to ensure your tiles are going down in a straight line, and make sure you're not tiling yourself into a corner. After installing 3 or 4 tiles, place a 2x4 on top and tap lightly with a rubber mallet. This will level the tiles and embed them firmly into the mortar. Then continue spreading mortar and setting additional tiles. Throughout the process, use a damp sponge to clean off any mortar that ends up on the top of the tiles. Do not let it dry. Once dry, mortar on the finished floor is extremely hard to remove. Also, check your alignment by stepping back every so often and looking down the tile edges to be sure the lines are straight. This should be done often before the mortar starts to dry and harden. If you find alignment issues while the mortar is still wet, you will be able to straighten them before continuing. If you need to take a break, always scrape up any mortar overlapping into an area you are about to tile. If left to dry, it will affect how well those new tiles adhere when you return to work those areas. Finish laying full tiles in your first quadrant. You'll then be left with the space between those tiles and the wall where cut tiles are required. Again, lay tiles so that you do not tile yourself into a corner, which would force you to walk on the newly installed tiles. Finish laying all full tiles in your other 3 quadrants and let the mortar harden. Different mortars have different curing times, but most require you to stay off the tile for 24 hours. Just follow the manufacturer's instructions. Now you're ready to start cutting tiles. For this task, you have 2 options: a manual snap cutter and an electric wet saw. The manual cutter is generally used for smaller jobs, but for larger jobs that require cutting on a large number of tiles, you will need to purchase or rent a wet saw. If you ever do a tiling project with natural stone, know that you always use a wet saw with those to prevent the tiles from breaking or chipping. Another tool you'll find yourself needing is a tile nipper. These are used to make specialty cuts needed around things like plumbing fixtures, pipes, and round corners. To cut a curve, mark the cutting line, then cut away bits of tile with the tile nippers. Wear safety glasses when working with the nippers and smooth the cut edges with an abrasive stone. To figure out where to cut a tile that will fit into a space left along the wall, place the tile that you're going to cut directly on top of the next full tile near the wall. Then, place 2 tiles upright against the wall. This will leave an expansion gap between the tiles and the wall, which will allow the floor to expand without causing cracks. It will also account for the space needed for the grout line. Then, place a 4th tile against those 2 tiles and on top of the tile to be cut. Trace along the edge of the 4th tile with a China marker to draw a line on that first tile. This is where you will make your cut. Once you cut the tile, it will fit perfectly in the space. Now, to avoid confusion, lay out, mark, and cut small groups of tile at a time. Then leave those cut tiles in the space where they will be installed. Also plan to install your cut tiles in small groups to avoid mixing too much mortar and risking it drying out before you can use it all. To be safe, measure twice before cutting. To use the manual snap cutter, align the cutting wheel with the cut line you made with your China marker. Raise the pressing bar and push the cutting wheel away from you using moderate pressure. This will score the tile. Then, lift the cutting wheel, lower the pressing tee, and strike the handle to snap the tile. When using the wet saw, always wear safety glasses. Adjust the fence or guide so the cut mark lines up with the blade. Hold the tile with both hands and advance the tile into the blade, guided by the fence. Cut slowly to avoid chipping the tile. Change the tile saw blades when cuts are not clean. Be aware that wet saws do splash water and tile residue during operation. The final step in tiling is applying grout. There are several types of grout available: Poly Blend grout in both sanded and non-sanded, Fusion Pro, a single component grout that never needs to be sealed, Simple Pre-Mixed grout, a no-mix alternative to traditional grout, and epoxy grout. Be sure and ask a store associate which type is right for your project. Grout fills the spaces between the tiles. Use the grout coverage conversion charts on the back of the package to determine the amount of grout needed. And always wear rubber gloves and safety glasses when working with grout. Before grouting, you must remove all of your tile spacers. Again, leaving the spacers in place and grouting over them will compromise the integrity of the grout. You'll also want to protect baseboards, trim, and neighboring floors with painter's tape. And make sure you've purchased the correct type of grout. For joints 1/8 to 1/2 inch, use a sanded grout. For joints up to 1/8 inch, use a non-sanded grout. We will be using a cement-based grout for this install. To mix cement-based grout, use a drill and mortar paddle in a bucket. Almost all cement grouts have latex polymer in the powder mix. Others require a latex polymer admixture. Follow your manufacturer's instructions. Similar to thinset, once the cement grout is mixed, allow it to stand for 10 minutes before applying, and avoid mixing too much grout at one time. Just mix enough for small sections at a time until you become comfortable with the spreading process and can increase your speed. And don't forget to wear safety glasses. Spread grout in sweeping arcs with the rubber grout float held at a shallow angle. Apply at a 45-degree angle to the spaces between the tiles to prevent the float from pressing into the spaces and creating uneven grout surfaces. Press grout into the joints, filling them completely. Focus on small 4 by 4 foot sections. After the grout is spread, remove the excess with the grout float held at a 45-degree angle. Work diagonally across the joints, again to avoid dipping into the joints. The cement grout will set up in about 5 to 15 minutes and have a putty-like consistency. As soon as you complete one section, take a damp sponge and do very light passes across the tiles diagonally to clean off the excess grout. Wring the sponge out until no water drips from it before cleaning. Excess water left behind can affect the consistency of the grout. Use both edges of each side of the sponge. Be careful not to press the sponge into the gaps. The drier the grout is on the tile surface, the harder it is to remove. Do as many passes as needed. The tiles won't be clean on the first pass, so just be patient. Rinse the sponge frequently in clean water and change the rinse water often. The cleaner the water is, the more effectively it will remove the grout from the surface of your tiles. Remove any remaining haze by using an old t-shirt or cheesecloth. If you have trouble, try adding a grout haze remover solution. Try and remove all of the haze before it dries completely. Again, the drier it becomes, the harder it is to remove. Help to slowly cure the grout by misting it twice a day for 3 days. Do not walk over the surface for 8 to 12 hours to avoid getting debris and dirt in the grout lines. Grout Sealer provides unsurpassed invisible protection for grout. Sealing your grout is critical to keeping grout lines clean and looking like new. Sealers help prevent stains and keep mildew and mold from growing into the grout. It's also easy to apply. You can choose a sealer with a built-in applicator or pick up a grout sealer application bottle. Another option is a product like Stain Blocker. It's a grout additive that is mixed with grout to provide exceptional stain resistance during the curing process. Ask a store associate which sealer or additive is best for your install. Follow the manufacturer's instructions on when to apply your sealer. In most cases, you'll want to allow the grout to cure for about 3 days. Regardless of which you choose, you can expect your grout sealer to last an average of 1 to 2 years before needing to reapply it. To test, drop water on the grout. If it seems to soak in, it's time to reseal. Make sure to wipe away any excess within 10 minutes. If you're using glazed tile, be extra careful to only seal the grout. To finish your project, remove the tape from any protected surfaces. Cover the 1/4-inch expansion gap left along the walls. You can do this with either matching bullnose tile or wood quarter-round molding or just regular baseboards. And finally, if you weren't required to do so earlier in the process, now add any desired thresholds between your tiled floor and neighboring floors. And with that, your tile project is complete.
All right, so that's it. When you're coming to do your tiles, first gather all of your tools. And the tools that you need are going to depend on the type of tile that you're laying down. Remember what we always say, read the label, the cases of tiles. Your flooring specialists, they will all know the best size trowel, the best types of grout. If thinset that specialized exists, get it. Gather all the tools that you need. Then go ahead and prep your surface. It's got to be waterproof if it can. It's got to be level for sure. That way you don't have any of those cracked tiles or any of those things breaking over time. Just waste your time. Remember, you can do this right or you can do it again. Once you've prepped your surface, whether it's concrete or subfloor, dry fit. It seems like a step that is easy to skip. Don't, folks. Dry fit that floor, then make your cuts. And by the way, get a little extra tile. Some say 10%. Me, I'm a mistake maker. and get 20% if you can extra, because mistakes in cutting, they're just going to happen. Get all those tile cut, then get to the messy part. Spread your mortar, lay out those tiles, make sure to leave enough space. Let it cure all the way. Grout, let the grout dry all the way, and seal. After you've done that, you gotta do tile 4. This is not always a 1 or 2 day project. Yes, it may take an entire weekend. It may take 2 weekends, but if you do it the right way, you let things cure the right way, you're going to be set. Come check out some of our other DIY workshops. We've got great tile backsplashes. We've got great ones where we talk about toilets, faucets, and a ton. And if you don't see a DIY workshop that you want to register for, let us know. Last but not least, let us say thank you. You could have been doing anything else today, but you came here to hang out with us and have some fun and learn a little bit about your tile. This is the highlight of Joe and I's day, but without you, there is no us. We love helping you, the doer, just go out and get more done. So thank you for being here. Man, we really hope to see you at the next workshop. Have a good one, guys.